Hello, everybody. This is Jennifer Matarese, and before I get started on the episode today, I'd just like to take care of the usual housekeeping. For starters, paid requests are now reopened. If you're interested in submitting a disaster request, please double-check the list of requests I most recently posted to the podcast, Facebook, and Tumblr to make sure your request has not already been made. Also, please look through past episodes to verify I haven't already covered the disaster in question. To submit a request, you can send a donation of $30 or more to the podcast PayPal at disasterarea@mail.com, on Venmo at Disaster Area Podcast, or on Cash App at Disaster Area Pod. Just add the name of the disaster to the notes on your donation. If you have an idea for an episode subject but you're not sure if it qualifies, feel free to message me and I can approve one way or the other. The subject from this particular episode was chosen due to recent events and is a bit of a bonus in that the 1987 flooding could arguably be a whole episode all on its own, but we're just covering this part because of everything going on in Texas right now. And the second part of the Cutter incident episode is coming. I swear, I just wanted to whip this together really quickly to share the story with all of you. If you'd still like to help support the podcast, you can do so with a one-time donation through PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App, or on a per-episode basis through Patreon at www.patreon.com/disasterareapodcast. A per-episode donation of even as little as $1 an episode can help me do things like pay the rent and keep the lights on. And if you do join the Patreon, you will get new episodes ad-free as soon as I record them, rather than waiting until they are released. So if you do become a patron, I would very much appreciate it. And if you're just listening to the regular feed, I would really appreciate it if you listen to the ads, because that also helps to fund the podcast. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook at Disaster Area Podcast, on Instagram at Disaster Area Pod, and on Tumblr at Disaster Area-podcast. Also, please think about rating and reviewing the podcast wherever you might listen to me. And as always, the sources for each new episode can be found at disasterareapodcast.wordpress.com and in the episode description wherever you might be listening to me. The sources for this episode include the articles Toll at 8 in Texas Flooding, 2 Young Campers Are Still Missing from Philly.com. Almost 40 years ago, 10 children died in a comfort flood that shook Texas from mysanantonio.com. A clip from the Señor Onions archives on YouTube about the Guadalupe flood of 87, and an interview with the sheriff at the time of the disaster. Sources also include the pilot episode of Rescue 911 and the television movie The Flood, Who Will Save Our Children. With all of that taken care of, thank you very much for listening, and welcome to Disaster Area. Bonus episode: the 1987 Guadalupe River disaster. July 17th, 1987. 10 deceased, multiple injured. Over the past week, people have been hearing about the flash flooding in Kerr County, Texas, resulting from storms which swelled the Guadalupe River past its banks and beyond. One of the places affected by the flooding was an all-girls church camp named Camp Mystic, where dozens of girls were swept away by the rising floodwaters. Many immediately expressed concern and empathy for the lost girls. My first thought, after hoping they'd be located alive but knowing that it was unlikely, was a strong sense of déjà vu. The story sounded familiar because it happened before, in 1987. A group of Christian campers, a hard rain, and the exact same river taking away young lives, the same as we saw it do this week. Now, the Guadalupe River wiggles its way through southern Texas like a drunken rattlesnake trying to get home through a minefield. If you start trying to follow it on Apple Maps, you can find its mouth down by the San Antonio Bay where it meets the Gulf of Mexico. But the rest of it does what feels very Texan and just sort of meanders its way toward the northwest, wriggling almost around San Antonio before continuing onward into the rural, low-lying areas where it starts in western Kerr County. Because of how low-lying the areas around the Guadalupe River can be, that area of Texas has acquired the nickname nobody would want for the place where they live, Flash Flood Alley. The Guadalupe River has a bad habit of making like the poor cousin at Thanksgiving and eating up every bit of food it can get its hands on. In this case, the food is rain. Now, normally, when you see pictures of what the Guadalupe River normally looks like, it looks like the sort of river that you see like in a movie that's a romance or like a rom-com about, a sweet couple in the South who are going on a horseback ride, and they start, they ride through rural areas, they ride through ranches and stuff like that, and they get to this really cute little river. It's calm, it's low, there's trees around where they can have some shade and sit and talk. It's got that kind of visual to it. Now, we all know how the weather behaves in our own area. When I was a kid, if the weather forecaster called for 6 to 12 inches of snow, people in my area knew that meant we'd be getting the foot of snow because of where we were located in the mountains. We just always got the worst amount of snow. In Kerr County, those in charge knew that when the Guadalupe River rose where it started on the western side of the county, it would be significantly higher by the time it reached the eastern side. So if it rose 10 feet at the source, that could mean the river could go twice or even 3 times as high by the time all that water got all the way across the county. Friday, July 17th. 1987 was a frustrating day at the Pot of Gold Ranch, 40 miles to the northwest of San Antonio. I should say it's Pot o' Gold, like pot of gold, not pot of gold. And now, it wasn't that the Christian camp being held there that summer was coming to an end. That wasn't the frustrating part. People were expecting it. This was the last day. Summer camp trips always end, after all, and all 300 of the kids who'd attended that week had seemingly had a good time. There had been a lot to do. There was, a rodeo. They had prayer services, but they had also had horseback riding and games and that sort of thing, all kinds of things to do. The Pot of Gold Ranch hosted students from Balch Springs Christian Academy in Dallas that month, as well as those from other Christian groups and schools in the hills just southwest of Comfort, Texas, where the land in satellite photos looks to be dotted with camps and ranches, but little else. It really doesn't look like an area that is very green, for that matter. There is stuff there. It does have, fenced in areas and stuff, but it's a lot of open land, just so much open land. Just to the north of the camp was the Guadalupe River, and if one were to drive down away from the ranch on the road named after it, like the main road, the first intersection you would reach would be a T crossing with Herman Sons Road East. You make a right, and Herman Sons Road East goes almost immediately over a bridge to cross the Guadalupe River. Now, before I go on, I should also add, this is about an hour away from where Camp Mystic is. So it is, I believe, an hour to the east. So yeah, that's how far away this is from the events of what happened here this week. This particular Friday was the last day the kids were supposed to be at camp anyway, and that day they'd been woken up early to be ready to leave. Like, really early. It was annoying. The kids were confused. Why did they all need to leave in such a rush? As the adults hustled them and their belongings onto their respective buses back to their churches and their schools and their hometowns, they filled the kids in. The day before and overnight, heavy rains had hung around the area, dumping 11 inches of rain into the area, and the Guadalupe River just slurped up every drop the sky wanted to feed it. Late the night before, the sheriff's department had made calls to camps in the area to let them know that the Guadalupe River was rising and to keep kids on higher ground. Now, the river was swelling past its banks, and if the buses didn't make a go of it, the kids might end up stuck there. The call itself, it seems that, there is kind of a differing story on what the camp itself was told. The sheriff's department said that they wanted, the river was rising, just stay where you are, get the kids on higher ground and keep them there, that sort of thing. The camp sort of gave a story that they weren't really told not to take the kids away. Like, it just is really confusing what they were told versus what they were, what they actually did. And it's just, it seems like the story is at cross purposes. Some of you may have already seen some lapse videos taken of the Guadalupe River as it once again overflowed this past week. There were a lot of them on TikTok and other social media sites showing the river and how fast it rose. The rising water moves upward at a terrifying pace, going from what seems like arguably a creek, depending where you were on the river, to its now raging waters swallowing up bridges and crawling eerily up hillsides. The one that I distinctly remember, I mean, there are two of them. There is one on a bridge where the river is usually relatively low to, cut to where it was when the river was full, and it was basically almost all the way up to the side of the river, to, where it could have nearly spilled over. It was at like a road level. And then there was another one where you can see footage from across the river of a road going up a hillside, and the river's rising and rising and rising and rising and rising and rising. And it's going really fast because, of course, it's time lapse. But you can see like cars coming down, looking at the water, going back up again, coming back in, and just people who were in the water or getting pulled out. You really can't see things because they're going too fast, so you can't get a clear story on what's going on, but you can see how fast that water goes up. So here's the thing about the Pot of Gold Ranch, or any rural area in America for that matter. There's the main way that you usually go. And then there are the 2 or 3 other ways you go if there's road work or an accident or bad weather. For example, I have 2 ways to get to dog camp. The normal way, winding through the countryside, past several different cattle farms, and the other way, which is the same distance from home, but makes for a safer ride home when it snows because it's busier, and so the snow really doesn't get a chance to stick. So if it does snow, instead of driving the way that I normally drive, where you can see cows and Professor can see them and he can bark at them and he's really happy, I end up driving the other way where I, have to drive down a road that has been very well traveled and is usually salted before everything else, cleared before everything else. At the very least, I only have one treacherous hill to go down, and there's really only one section that is treacherous because it's very slippery there. But once you get down that, you are in the valley, and it's basically a straight, even ride for a couple of miles until I get home. In the case of the Pot of Gold Ranch, it had a back road in addition to the main exit, which led out so close to the river. So you have the main exit, which lets out close to the river, and this other road, which goes a different way, so that they can try to exit presumably a more safe way. I tried. As God is my witness, I tried on this map of the Pot of Gold Ranch, looking at it on satellite photos, tried to figure out which road they had gone down, and I think I found it. The thing is that looking at a satellite photo when the Guadalupe River is calm and it's low and you really can't see it, you kind of have to trace it with your finger as you're, through trees, and a lot of the times you really can't see it. There are trees on the river and they just completely hide the river from view in a lot of places. So you can't tell just by following the river where exactly this road could be. I mean, it's a dirt road, clearly. It is, a back road, and so it could be like any of the directions that I'm talking about. Like the Guadalupe River just winds around this area. But I had some sort of an idea of where this back road is that they took, and it makes a lot of sense given how they mapped out what happened later on. Now, that morning, 4 other buses led the way down this back road in an attempt to avoid the floodwaters as they were leaving camp. The 5th bus carried those Balch Springs students who attended Seago Road Baptist Church, and the bus was driven by Reverend Richard Coons, whose wife Lavonda was also on the big blue bus. Now, they had a little girl at the time, and they almost brought her with them. She was 6 years old, and so she would have been on the bus as well. And fortunately, they had not brought her with them this year to camp. Right behind them was a Balch Springs van, slowly creeping along with the rest of this parade of vehicles. So you have these 2 vehicles, this bus and this van, that are both with the Seagoville Road Baptist Church. with these Balch Springs students, for the most part, students from Balch Springs. And they're all from, this is the Dallas area that they're all from. So they have to drive back to Dallas in these buses. What happened next would later be determined as the survivors reenacted the drive for investigators. The road they were going down did not normally go close to the river, but as they approached a turn in the road, the edge of the river crept ever closer to the road. So there's like this turn in the road. And all of these buses are going down this road and making the turn, going down this road and making the turn. And then off to one side, you have the river, and it's coming closer and closer and closer and rising into the road itself. And the buses are going through like a little bit of water at first. So they're just kind of, they're turning in this water, and it looks fine. So the big blue Seago Road Baptist Church bus quickly found the rising water swallowing their bus inch by inch from the bottom up as they go through the water. They pull ahead, they start going through to make this turn, and then the bus stalls. In the pilot episode of Rescue 911, one survivor described what initially happened. Quote, "We started going around a corner, would to go down the hill, and water started coming in the bus and stuff. We tried to back up, but then the bus got stuck." Also, if I accidentally slip into some kind of southern accent, I apologize, but a lot of these quotes are delivered by people who have very thick Texan accents, so it kind of is, it might revert to that. At this point, the drivers and campers made a desperate move. You have the big blue bus, which is stuck in the water. It can't get out. The van is stuck behind it. It now also can't get out because the rising waters are starting to take it as well. So staying in the bus and the van are not an option. They cannot stay in there. This water is coming up way too quickly. They have to get out. They exit the vehicles. They hold hands, and they start walking toward the shifting shoreline. They're trying to make it back up onto land again. At the time, it really didn't seem that serious. You were talking about a bunch of kids on a bus. As kids do, they were teasing each other. They're, oh, you're going to have to get wet. Your shoes are going to get wet. Oh, it's the girls are going to have to walk through the water. You know how it is. You know how kids are. This is exactly the kind of thing that they're doing. Okay, I'll help you out. Like, I think in the movie, the TV movie, there is a character who has a broken leg who has a cast on, and one of the other characters is like, hold on, I'll carry you out. Like, I don't know, because I did not see any reference to a person, a survivor who had a broken leg, so I can't confirm that is something that was actually taken from real life. There was a camper named Scott Chatham who had leukemia. But, we're talking about, this kid that had this broken leg, and somebody else who I'm given to understand is based on a kid named John Bankston Jr., who helped a lot of kids. He was trying to help other kids get off the bus, get to land. Like, he was being very helpful. The attempt lasted mere seconds. The water was simply rising too fast. One survivor described the group as being hit with, quote, just a big old gush. Almost as soon as the kids and adults left the bus and the van, a first wave knocked them down and shoved them down the river. 43 people in all. The van and the bus both tumbled away, beginning to roll down the Guadalupe like loosened logs. Now, it's really hard to picture that if you look at pictures of the Guadalupe River normally, because it does not look like a river that is high enough to make like a Tonka truck roll over like this, much less a bus and a van. But it picked up the bus and the van and just took them. It like flipped the bus over very, very quickly, and just right down the stream it went. With the fierce currents and the debris ripped away from local ranches, you're talking about fence posts, barbed wire. There's horses who were hopefully already deceased, had already drowned and weren't suffering, that were being, floated down this river. The kids all found themselves in a desperate struggle to keep their heads above water and not be knocked out by any other debris that was coming at them. They're trying to grab for something. It would turn out that there was only one way to keep yourself safe from the overgrown floodwaters. See, if you look for the Guadalupe River on Apple Maps, like I said earlier. You may have noticed there are trees here or there. There's not a lot of trees, but there are a handful of trees here or there, like usually near the river for obvious reasons. But it's things like pecan trees, hackberry trees, like things like that that are giving shade over this river. And so when the water rose, they swallowed up these huge, sturdy trees close enough to the river. 20 to 30 feet of floodwaters meant not only that the trees were the only things sticking out of the water, but their branches, more than likely too high to reach under normal circumstances, were now within grabbing distance for these terrified kids. The only thing that they had to grab onto were these trees. It didn't take long before the trees in the swollen river were decorated with the shivering bodies of kids who'd scrambled out of the water to safety. The waters were going so fast that they were tearing bark off of these trees. They were, they're tearing things out of the land. Like, they are going really fast with a lot of power. And it's a kind of a miracle that so many of these kids managed to grab onto these trees and get into them. They clung to the branches no matter the fear and the insects. I mean, I'm thinking about like fire ants maybe, the racing waters beneath them. You're just talking about a lot of exposure that is going on. They refused to let go. Many of them had had pieces of clothing torn from their bodies by the water and could be seen in video footage that was recorded that day, wearing only jeans or a tank top and underwear. All of their other clothes had been ripped off, or they had taken off some of their clothes, some of them to kind of make a rope or something to try and reach others who were in the river. Here and there, kids would break out in worship songs or prayers to keep their spirits up. They were really trying to keep themselves mentally, attached to what was going on, distract themselves from how stressful everything was. And so it was going to be a long time that these kids were in these trees. Some of them were in there for hours, and it is already scary enough to be in there for 10 minutes, to be in there for 3 hours, 4 hours, however long they were. That's just, I mean, I can't imagine the mental trauma of going through that. Almost as soon as the kids were swept away, help by way of a helicopter rescue was requested. Soon enough, there was at least one helicopter in the air, although it wasn't a rescue helicopter. Now, there were other helicopters out that day. The sheriff's department had actually sent out a helicopter to a section of the river that was farther to the west, where a bunch of people had been stranded on a bit of land that had been flooded out on around it. So they were stuck on an island. And so they had to go and send the helicopter and go down and pick them up and take them to safety. But one of the first helicopters that also showed up, because that sheriff's helicopter immediately turned around and headed for the Pot of Gold Ranch after they heard about what was going on, there was a news helicopter from Ken's 5 TV from San Antonio. It took off with pilot Mike Rice and cameraman David Villarreal on board. Rice had previously flown helicopters in Vietnam, so he wasn't scared to go low for a good shot, and it would show. When the news helicopter reached the scene of the flooding, they expected it to just be like the sort of flooding the Guadalupe River experiences all the time. But Villarreal's camera quickly picked up images that must have been terrifying to recognize. In the trees clung dozens of children and teenagers, holding on for dear life and waiting for someone to come get them. You can see faces. It's these really pale kids just clinging to trees all over the place, and they're just holding on. And the image is just startling. In some of Villarreal's footage taken that day, the visuals of the kids in the trees are from the same level as the helicopter, indicating that pilot Rice took one hell of a chance flying low enough for Villarreal to get clear shots straight across the racing river of people who were stuck in the trees, kids who were being rescued. They lower that helicopter a lot, and it turns out not just for taking footage of the kids who were trapped in those trees. The Texas Department of Public Safety also sent in their own helicopters, and Villarreal filmed as they too lowered themselves so they could lower ropes down to the kids in the trees. In one shot, a Texas DPS helicopter can be seen flying away from the flood, a rope dangling below it and looped beneath the arms of a teenager. Basically they put a big loop in the end, and you would put it over your head and under your arms, and it would lift up, and like that. So this particular kid was 17-year-old Chris Ray, who is kind of lifted up and carried over to a safer place and then gently lowered into a nearby field where people are starting to gather. The news helicopter landed. The camera carried by David Villarreal, it shows them racing go over to Chris Ray's side as Ray is being embraced by someone. As the camera reaches Ray's side, another man asks Ray how many people were there. It's hard to hear precisely what Ray says, given that there are helicopter blades whirring overhead or nearby from all of these helicopters. But when he says about 40, the man repeats the number in shock. He just 40. Like the sound of it is like, just, oh God, we got a lot of work on our hands here. As Rice and Villarreal are about to go up again, they take Ray Masterman, a volunteer firefighter, along for the ride. If they saw someone they might be able to save, Villarreal could film while Masterman and Rice work together to get the kids to safety. In one clip, Masterman throws down an orange rope to two kids holding onto a tree and then has to make a second attempt. He can be seen gesturing to the kids on how to put the loop at the end of the rope over one of them so that they can be carried away like Chris Ray was. The next shot in the Rescue 911 segment shows the muddy rail of the helicopter, like the skid, and the orange rope dangling down past it as the helicopter flies over the gray-brown river, carrying at least one victim away to dry land. At this moment, the team were told a girl had been spotted in the river, not in a tree, but being dragged down the river by the strong current. Rice didn't stop to refuel. He simply lifted back up again and headed for the river. He really needed to refuel, but they were going to go get this girl. And you can see him rising up, and there's like 2 or 3 people literally pointing in the direction of where the girl was spotted. It didn't take long for the trio to spot 14-year-old Melanie Finley in the river. Her head is above the dirty water, but she's clearly in distress. You can see she's got dark hair and it's a bit away from her face, and she keeps looking, she's got her head tilted back so that she can look up at this helicopter. Villarreal yells, "There she is right there, Mike. She's floating in the water right there. She's still okay." When Rice lowers the helicopter to just a few feet above the water near Finley, Masterman grabs the rope, scrambles down, and jumps into the water. He clearly intends to swim over, grab Finley, and have the helicopter carry them both to safety. Masterman kept trying to get her once, twice, 3 times, but the river was just too strong. The next thing the 3 men knew, the girl was gone. She ended up getting pulled away. They actually dropped her at one point. They had gotten her, and they grabbed her and they pulled her, but she just fell, and she fell back into the water, and back she went. Not long after Melanie Finley floated off down the Guadalupe River, 4 Army ambulance helicopters arrived loaded with rescue staff in an attempt to get the kids. One of those rescuers was a man named, I believe, Sergeant Mackenzie, and he would do a lot of the going down in a harness, in basically like a rescue chair. And he would be lowered down, and they would, on a rope in this little harness, this chair, and he would grab a kid, the kid would wrap themselves around him, and they would go back up again. These trained Army rescuers would be lowered down, but they would need to be cut free of the helicopters if they got trapped in the branches as well. That was something they needed to understand. They need to hold on. They might get abandoned. That was just something that they would need to do to continue rescuing others. They would have to go back and get another harness or something along those lines. One of the first kids these helicopters were flown in to save was Scott Chatham, a 16-year-old boy who'd already been dealing with leukemia. Now he was weak and shivering as he hugged tightly to the tree he stood in. In footage filmed by Villarreal, an Army member, that would be Sergeant Mackenzie, lowers down through the branches to Chatham. Chatham holds out a hand and pulls Mackenzie closer. Chatham is encouraged to basically wrap himself around the rescuer. I mean, we're talking about a 16-year-old boy, and he basically grabs on to Mackenzie and like wraps around him like a toddler. His arms are around his chest, legs around his waist, so he wouldn't fall. Chatham and Mackenzie are then hauled up by rope into the helicopter overhead. The Army helicopters would be on site for several more hours, pulling one person after another from the trees until they'd saved 26 people in total. Mackenzie himself saved like 15. He just got a lot of those people, a lot of those kids out of those trees. Another 7 were rescued as well by the Ken's 5 helicopter and other rescuers who'd arrived on the scene to help. That made 33 survivors out of 43. So where were the others? 10 kids would die as a result of a bus and a van from the local church camp being swept away by flash flooding near Comfort, Texas on July 17th, 1987. The flooding that day was the worst experienced by the Guadalupe River since 1932. Several adults and a few dozen other campers were pulled from the water or from the trees and taken to local hospitals, specifically the one in Comfort. There was one in Comfort. There was also like a shelter being set up at one of the schools, so it was a very busy day in Comfort. The survivors themselves had gone through so much, but the families of the victims found their own pain being drawn out for hours and then days in some cases. The bodies had been carried off as those stolen by the Fae, and it would take time to locate each and every one. As you might remember from episode 168 on the Prestonsburg bus accident, where it was days and weeks that they were waiting for these kids to be pulled out of the water in that situation. Once the floodwaters had gone out, everyone and their cousins stepped out to go out and locate the lost kids. I mean, you had the authorities, of course, but volunteers and family members were all willing and ready to go out and start looking for these lost children. One of the first to be located was Melanie Finley. The 14-year-old girl Ray Masterman jumped into the river to save. Her final moments, in which she can be seen staring hopefully up at the helicopter at one point, were captured on film by David Villarreal. Later that day, the body of 13-year-old Tanya Smith would also be pulled out of the river. On July 18th, rescuers located 6 of the missing kids. It's the Saturday, one by one down the river. A couple hundred yards from the battered school bus, 16-year-old Mike O'Neill lay motionless on the side of the river. A mile and a half down the river from Mike O'Neill was 16-year-old Stacy Smith, almost concealed from sight after being buried by the river in thick mud. Nearly 5 miles down the river from Stacy Smith, 15-year-old Legenia Keenum had ended up crammed up under a tree. 2 miles farther down the river was another victim, 16-year-old Mike Lane. Then about 18 miles away from where the Guadalupe River first picked up the bus and the van and began to tumble them like playthings, 17-year-old Cindy Sewell's body was located. For the moment, she remained tentatively identified, giving some indication of just how bad the condition of her body must be. Her younger brother Christopher was found not long after Cindy was, Hare's body turning up close to that of Mike Lane. This left the Sewell family who'd sent all 4 of their kids to camp with only 2 children to bring home alive. When they located the body of Stacy Smith, by the way, she was the older sister of Tanya and the younger sister of 18-year-old Michael, who had survived. In the movie, the TV movie, now obviously this is a TV movie, the accuracy may not be entirely on point. There's always a lot of drama written into these things, but the way that they tell the story is basically that he was very protective of his younger sisters, and he was kind of, given this order to take care of them, make sure they stay okay, keep an eye on them, all of that. And of course, now they are lost, and it was obviously very upsetting for the family. Their uncle, Richard Teckle, was among the people who was searching for them, and he was looking with everybody else when some people on the other side of the river start going, hey, we found a body over here. And so Teckle starts asking, is it a girl? Is she blonde? Like he really wants to make sure they had already known about Tanya and they were still looking for Stacy, or at least he was. And so a helicopter actually gave him a lift over the river. And that is where they found Stacy. So he was able to identify her. And make sure that they had found her. The last body that they found was Leslie Gossett, And then there was John Bankston. John Bankston Jr. was never found. The town of Comfort quickly stepped up to help. Survivors were rushed to the local hospital, and families who'd hurried down to find their kids were sheltered at the Comfort Elementary School alongside survivors from the river. People from Comfort came to help and to lend a hand, to pray with them, to, give them any kind of help that they wanted. They were just bending over backwards to help these people who had lost their kids and who, had been so incredibly worried, and some of them had gotten their kids back and some had not. And it was just a really horrific tragedy for everybody, especially, given the age of the victims. During that morning of successful rescues and broken hearts, the blue school bus, which stalled in the rising river, ended up deposited against the riverbank. Its white top was crushed inward, its tires jerked out of position, its broken windows crammed with weeds and grass. The name Seago Road Baptist Church was still visible on the bus despite the damage. It's not really visible as far as I remember. It's the way that the roof was crushed was making it a little more difficult, and it really was filled with like grass and weeds and stuff that it had picked up along the way as it had tumbled down the river. But I mean, it's a really identifiable bus. I mean, we're talking about a big blue bus, so it's just really sad to see it the way that it was. If the kids had stayed on that bus, they would clearly have gone through, it probably would have been a whole lot worse. As happens after every disaster, questions would arise about whether those in charge of the camp made the right call. In the mysanantonio.com article mentioned at the start of the episode, local volunteer firefighter Steve Boner stated, quote, "They were told the river was coming up, and if you want to leave now. But they should have just waited. It was just one of those freaky, unfortunate things that never should have happened." End quote. In response to the flooding in 1987, authorities installed high water warning systems along the river with plans for updates as needed. In a 2017 article on this incident, then Sheriff Rusty Hierholzer, I'm guessing, said it was entirely possible the loss of life caused by the Guadalupe River flooding could end up being repeated in the future. Quote, "The river is even more dangerous now than back then for loss of life because the county has grown and there are so many more people on the river who haven't seen that type of flood. Unfortunately, people still think they can beat it when it's coming up or that it won't come up as far." In the same 2017 article, Kerr County Commissioner Tom Moser boasted of a $1 million federal grant that they had applied for that would allow the county to update the previous high water warning systems and add 10 more, as well as placing gauges of water depth at low water crossings in the area. And those gauges would transmit to a website that people could check to verify where to cross safely. So, if you're going to drive and you're going to leave home and it's flash flooding and you just want to double check your route, you can go to this website and it'll tell you, okay, well, this area is flooded over. You need to go in this direction or that direction, all of that. But that's just... Again, that article is just talk about them applying for the grant. It doesn't say they got the grant. It doesn't say what they did with the money, which I'm not going to address because we're just dealing with this disaster. Several of the families who lost loved ones in the accident sued the Pot of Gold Ranch in response. Those cases were later settled out of court. No criminal charges were filed in the wake of the accident, the crossing being considered simply, quote, "an error in judgment" by Reverend Coons. And presumably by the other people who were driving buses. But, I mean, you can't really charge somebody for deciding to do this. It wasn't something that, in the situation, probably seemed that unsafe. Given that you had 4 other buses right in front of you who were able to go ahead. I can't imagine trying to make that decision in the moment and being like, well, those other 4 buses were able to do it. I should be able to do it too. If we go fast enough and, I pull through this water, we should be fine. But the way that the river was rising, it wasn't going to work. And it probably would have been a lot better if they had just stayed at the Pot of Gold Ranch. As I understand it, the Pot of Gold Ranch is up on higher ground, and they would have been okay to stay there and not leave, but I wouldn't quote me on it because I couldn't really tell exactly how high up the ranch was compared to the river, especially when it would have been overflowing at the time. So, it's really difficult to tell from satellite photos the height of these sorts of things. A year after the tragedy, a memorial to those lost, as well as those who survived, was dedicated. It sat near the river amongst the trees in which the kids from the van and the bus stayed alive by clinging on for dear life. Spotting the memorial on satellite photos can be difficult as it sits in the shade of those pecan and hackberry trees not far from the Pot of Gold Ranch's entrance. And if I'm saying pecan wrong, for those of you in the South, I apologize, but people say pecan differently. Pecan, whatever. I apologize. The memorial was a large granite block, atop which was a plaque sharing the details of the incident in question, which church groups were involved, who lost their lives, and all of those who somehow managed to survive. They put everybody on this plaque. They were incredibly grateful to everybody who was a part of this, thankful for everybody who survived, and mourning the loss of everybody who died. So they put everybody on there. At the bottom of the plaque was the following quote from Thessalonians. For what is our hope, or joy, or crown of rejoicing? Are not even ye in the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ at his coming? For ye are our glory and joy. That same year, President Ronald Reagan posthumously awarded the Young American Medal for Bravery to John Bankston Jr., the flood victim whose body was never recovered. As kids were struggling to stay afloat and grab onto trees, Bankston was able to help several of his fellow campers. Every story that I've seen mentioned that John Bankston Jr. was being very heroic and helping his friends and saving his fellow campers and just being really helpful. And it's tragic that he lost his life. It's tragic that everybody lost their lives, but he really went out being a hero. There are two reasons I remember this particular tragedy as clearly as I do. The first is that the story of the campers lost in the Guadalupe River was the subject of a 1993 made-for-TV movie called The Flood, Who Will Save Our Children, from which the most recognizable actor is probably Renee O'Connor, later best known for playing Gabrielle from Xena Warrior Princess and playing victim Leslie Gossett in the movie itself. A presumably underfunded TV disaster movie and not quite where you might expect a strong attempt at accuracy, but due to the videos of the rescues that were filmed, much of what happened that day on the river is portrayed relatively well. I can't vouch for all of its accuracy, but it does, a pretty good job of being able to integrate that footage into the movie to portray all of these kids and what they went through. The other reason I remember this story so well is because of the show Rescue 911. For those of you too young to remember it, Rescue 911 was a show hosted by William Shatner in which several stories of rescue and survival were told to the audience over the course of an hour. It's usually like 2 or 3 stories unless it was a big one, and then it was just, that one story for the whole hour, but it was normally like 2 or 3 stories. It's like late 80s, early 90s. You have to imagine the hair and the clothes and everything. But it was one of those shows that people like me watched religiously. You can imagine. And I can imagine as I explain what Rescue 911 is, everybody in my age group is just slowly feeling old. The very first episode told the story of what happened on the Guadalupe River that day, and the footage of kids being rescued from the trees would remain in the credits for multiple seasons. I believe it was in the credits for the entire show, but I know it was in there for most of the series, and especially there's a shot of a helicopter coming in. I think that may be from that episode as well. That's always in the credits. It was a major part of Rescue 911. Those of us of a certain age may remember those images simply because they preceded William Shatner narrating the story of someone falling off a cliff or a little kid calling 911 to get help for their injured parent. Some of these stories about rescue were not that serious, and some of them were this. They were disasters, they were fires, they were, that kind of thing. So, one of these days I'm going to sit down and just watch some Rescue 911's episodes just for the heck of it. But yeah, I really wanted to cover this really quickly, just given everything that's going on right now. I whipped this together in 2 days. And this story just, I think it sticks with me in part, like I said, because it was a TV movie and it was an episode of Rescue 911. That footage was all over the news. And the thing is that 1987, 1988, 1989, that was like my sweet spot for getting into disasters and getting really interested in them, and I would read the newspaper and get so involved. And we're talking this, Jessica McClure, The Baby in the Well, the Challenger explosion, locating the sinking of the Titanic, which I think was 85 or 86, but same thing. And the World Series earthquake. Like, there were multiple disasters that happened during this time that were very big and very interesting to a kid like me who was creepy. So yeah, this was one of those stories that I remember. It just sticks in my head. And when I heard about the what was going on and that there were all these campers missing at a river in Texas, I was like, is that the same river that did this? And then I went back and double checked it. Like, yeah, that is the same one. It is about, like I said, I believe it's an hour to the east, give or take. I checked on Apple Maps really quick, and that's the kind of thing that it gave me. My understanding from what I was watching on the interview with the sheriff is that it is... The Guadalupe River is at the other side. It starts at the other side of Kerr County. And so, I mean, that's an hour away across the county to get to this. So it's a long county, I think, lengthwise, west to east. So there is that. And it is Texas. So, but honestly, when you look at the Guadalupe River, like in satellite photos from above, it does not look like a big river. It does not look like a big river at all. And yet when you see photos of it, when it is flooding, when it is flash flooding, like when it rises, it's upsetting because it is so, it just goes out. These are floodplains. It is surrounded by floodplains. And so when it rises, I mean, that water just goes everywhere, and it's going up, and it's just a lot of people who are in a bad place. And especially when you look at a story like Camp Mystic, where pictures of, maps of the camp show that like half of the buildings on camp were in the area that got flooded. And it's not like people wouldn't have known that area gets flooded. Like, this happens, the Guadalupe River floods. Rivers flood. That's what happens. But when you build in floodplains, you have to understand that you have to, part of the exchange in I'm going to build on a floodplain is if they tell us that we have flood warnings and, we have flash flood, that we might have flash floods, that we need to get out of there immediately. No question. We can't sit around and wait, and none of that. And I'm not going to debate any of the current arguments about whether there were alerts or warnings for what happened, because I feel like it's too soon. And there's just a lot of misinformation that's out there. There is so much stuff that's out there right now. It is hard to parse through all of it to get through the stuff that is true and accurate. And even with warnings and things like that, it doesn't mean that people are going to listen. It becomes one of those things where if you deal with it a lot or on a regular basis, you become lax. You just kind of go, okay, well, this has happened before. I have plenty of time. If you live in Tornado Alley, I mean, we all know those pictures of people who are like standing outside, mowing their lawn while there's a tornado across, down the street. Like, when it's hurricanes, there are people like, no, we're just going to hang out and have a hurricane party because you're used to it. I tend to think of, in my area, it's blizzards. And when we get heavy snows, it tends to be, okay, I will just go out and I will get, bread, milk, and eggs. Make sure we have the essentials, go home, close the door, don't go anywhere, and just, stay inside and don't do anything like that. We're just going to do that. And, everything that comes along with it, the fact that the power may go out, or that there may be an emergency and there may be, it may be difficult for you to get somewhere, or, somebody may have an accident outside your house, or, like, so many things can happen in an emergency like that. And if you are so used to hearing about it over and over and just dealing with it over and over again, you can let something slide. So I can understand that the response to, hey, the river is rising, you might want to keep an eye on that, might be, okay, well, if it's coming at us, give us a holler. Like, it's just a really difficult thing to deal with sometimes, that a lot of what our reaction is to tragic things is that we do kind of get a little numb to how dangerous they can be, and how unsafe a situation can be if we deal with them constantly, or if we don't believe that a tragedy can happen to us. And so this isn't gonna be too bad. This doesn't happen here. This doesn't look serious, like nightclub fires. I think about, like, the Station nightclub fire, where people were just kind of leaving, but not rushing out the door at first, because your first thought is not, this entire building is going to burn to the ground. It's just, okay, well, there's a little fire, we need to go outside, and, it's not that. And so your first thought, if they're saying flash flooding, is maybe not, okay, well, it's not going to sweep my house away. Like, it might not be that. It's just really difficult to handle and to parse out what people are thinking in the moment. Like, you try to put yourself in Reverend Kuhn's shoes, and I wouldn't want to. I mean, the decision that he made was the wrong one. But he was making it in the moment and doing, what he thought was right and what he thought would work given the situation, and it just didn't. And I would never think to say, okay, well, that, it's all his fault and he should go to no. Accidents happen. People make bad decisions. It doesn't make them bad people. And there are just a lot of things that happen when people respond to disasters that, sometimes they have good responses, sometimes they have bad responses. And if they have a bad response, if you make a mistake, if you make a bad decision, if you, all anybody really wants to hear from you is for you to step up and say, oh, yes, I made a mistake. Yes, we should have done this. Yes, maybe we should have done that. We need to keep this in mind for the next time we do things. I am sorry, from everything that I've read of Reverend Kuhn's, it really affected him, and he felt great remorse, and everybody involved in this was just so... was very charitable and very helpful to one another, and very supportive of one another. And they were, as far as I can tell, from everything I've read, very supportive of, helping each other out and helping, those who went through it, including Reverend Kuhn's, to have, that... the help that they needed, the support that they needed, the mental health support that they needed to kind of go through this. So yeah, like I said, I really don't want to get into what's going on right now, because there's just so much, and there's so much back and forth, and so much, so many questions and so much information. And it's just one of those things where asking for things to be written about disasters that are happening right now is always something that I'm really hesitant to do, because of things like this, especially in the time of the internet, when you have, things being said left and right that are just not true, or misunderstood, or accusatory, or, there's so many people online right now that are saying, like, don't politicize this tragedy. Don't politicize this tragedy. And my reaction on TikTok was to say, like, all disasters get politicized. What you're looking for is to say, like, please just focus on empathy right now. I know that you are, having critical thoughts, and I understand that, but, like, don't use that to be cruel. But also, you have to accept, as an adult, as a mature, responsible adult, that people are going to politicize every single thing that happens. Every single thing that happens, especially when people pass away, people die in disasters like this.
fingers start getting pointed almost immediately. And so the mature and responsible thing to do as an adult, as somebody in charge, is to say, okay, people have died. Who did things, where can we find the flaws and how can we fix them? Did we do the flaws? If so, do we need to apologize? Do we need to step up and help and and give people funding, food, clothing? Like, there are so many things that we need to do as people to make sure that if we make a mistake, or if we mishandle things, or if we share information that is incorrect, that we correct ourselves. And if I ever share any information that's wrong, by the way, feel free to tell me and I will try to correct it in a future episode. I always try to hedge my bets in cases where the information that I have is iffy, or it's kind of secondhand, or it is like you can always tell. I always say I get things from differing sources, and one source will say one thing and one source will say another. I will share both and say, like, look, this is what the official report says, but this is also what somebody else says. And like, there are always ways to account for things like that, for when you make a mistake, and especially in disaster situations, you want to make sure that you don't do that again and that people don't go through that again. And there is a level of responsibility that anybody who is in an authority, a place of authority over others, they have a responsibility for others. There is that responsibility there to not only say when okay, well, we did this right this time and that's good, but this is what we did wrong and we need to hold ourselves accountable and we need to fix it. And so in this particular instance, there was this attempt to monitor the Guadalupe River following what happened. What happened this week? I have not done any research on it in terms of like the sort of research that I do for the podcast. It's just following a lot of it, but it is getting, it is in the middle of a lot of noise and chaos and misinformation and just a lot of sniping and online arguments and just a lot of stuff that I really don't like to dive into really close to following a disaster. So I don't even want to touch on that specifically, but in this particular case, it's just a matter of part of the reason me telling this story is to make it clear to everybody who listens to this podcast, if I haven't already made it clear in previous episodes, that if there is flash flood warnings and flash flood watches and all of that, flooding watches, and there is water on the road, don't drive through it. Don't drive through it. Don't drive through it. Don't go in it. To turn around and go somewhere else. Go to your grandma's and stay at her house for the night. Go to the movies or something. Like go stay at a hotel. Like don't, if you can't get back to your house for the night, don't drive through that water. Don't drive through that water. Get in touch with the proper authorities. If they're like, if there's, kids at your house or your family members at your house, get in contact with them. Like don't drive through water during flood times. Don't do that. Don't do that. I think I told this story a couple of times this week to like coworkers and stuff, and every time I was like, do not drive through flood waters. It's like when I'm talking about to them about doing the podcast, one of the first things I say is, if you go into a building that you've never been in before, make sure you find an exit other than the entrance to go through in case of an emergency. That's like one of the first things I tell people when I tell people I do this podcast and I describe it. And I'm like, oh, by the way, let me tell you this. This is a tip. Make sure you know that, because you're going to want to know that in the case of an emergency, because people rush towards the exit, the way that they came in normally, and that's where tragedy happens. And so, keep in mind that go out of another door. If there's a kitchen, there's usually a door there. Go out that way. Like in an emergency, don't go for the front entrance. Do not do that. But in this particular case, it's been a lot of please don't drive through standing water. Please don't drive through standing water. It's been raining a lot here this summer. So yeah, it's a lot of if you see water, don't drive through it. But yeah, That's that. And I am going to get the next part of the Cutter incident out. I just wanted to get this out of the way. It was stuck in my head and I really wanted to tell this story to you guys. So I have done so. And thank you very much for listening, guys. And until next time, stay safe.